when we look at these inequality questions, these are great. I mean, these are easier than multiple choice because all these ask us is a relationship greater or lesser or equal. And A will always be quantity A is greater. Answer choice B will always be B is greater. Now C, okay, same story, always will be, but it means they're equal to each other. So it's already a misnomer to call this inequalities, really, because one time out of four, 25% of the time, they will in fact be equal. And D is not an uncommon thing. One time out of four, the answer will be, we just don't have enough information to tell you for sure. It could be, it might be, it will be for some values, but not for others, and that's not good enough, which is great because, you know, for our purposes, that would allow you to rule that answer out. Remember, to be definite, to be A, B, or C, and a question has to give you a value, a unique value, one and only one value, and it's got to be true for every combination you could put together. So if it's only true some of the time but not the rest of the time, you can say D. It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient information. We can't tell for sure. That's great. So here's another tip. I probably didn't mention this last week. When you look at D, if the question is going to involve square roots, right there you want to be automatically suspicious, and it may be D. Can anyone tell me why I'm going to want to be suspicious of square roots? Can you tell me in the chat box? Okay, because with square roots, a square root, you know, square root of 16, yes, it could be positive 4 or it could be negative 4. That would give us two values. And that's not good enough because we get to be very, very strict, very, very demanding. That's not good enough. That's two values. That's not one value. Therefore, great. We get to say D because we don't know for certain whether they meant to say negative 4 or positive 4, et cetera, et cetera. So as we review, we saw this last week, but if you look at question 1, the top half of this page, which one of these two things is greater? I mean, already I'm kind of breaking this down. I'm trying to get at a rewording of the question into something that I can actually answer, you know, 1 or 2 or yes or no. And because we know they're going to be giving us trick questions, then we can appreciate that the beginning of our process is going to be getting at the problem that we're being asked to solve. So would you all please look at question 1 and let me know your answer in the chat box. Thank you. And, well, would you please put up a green check mark next to your name when you're done so I know when everyone's done. Again, we saw this last week, but some of you were not here last week, and still good review. I mean, no surprises there. The answer is A. The thing is, if we look at this at first glance, we don't have the proper information. We can't compare a peso to a shilling directly. So we break this down into two. They're not even problems, just two quantities. We relate a dollar to a peso, a peso to a dollar, and a shilling to a dollar. And this is the idea of coming up with a common frame of reference. And, of course, you'll see this in some story problems. If someone's in a market, well, then all bets are off, okay, because they could be using drachmas and rubles and dollars and pesos and cats and dogs going into business together. You can't do anything until you can come up with some kind of common frame of reference, which may be that everybody buys bananas. Okay, if 3 rubles will buy 5 bananas and $2 will buy 2 bananas, we still can't compare the ruble to the dollar directly, but if we compare them in terms of bananas, then we can get somewhere. And so that's what we have here, is that the dollar is the one thing these two have in common. And this is an example. It's tremendously effective on their part, so please be aware of this, that it's counterintuitive, especially if you're feeling under pressure, if you're feeling under time constraints or whatever. This one is counterintuitive because for whatever reason it may look like shillings ought to be a larger quantity because it's a larger number. But that's precisely why a shilling is worth less, because you ask yourself 2 questions, the same question twice. How many shillings would a dollar buy? A dollar would buy 32 shillings. So a dollar buys a lot of shillings. How many pesos would a dollar buy? A dollar would buy less even than 1. Okay, so which one of those is more valuable or is more expensive? Well, the peso, because I can't buy very much with $1. By putting it in terms of the dollar, then we're able to compare the two, and then it's obvious that it's 1. Another point here, you see more of the good news about this is that you don't have to do any calculations, even though this is the math part of the test. All you have to do is set the problem up correctly in your mind, logically, and then it's just which one is larger. And you're going to see more and more as the questions go from easy to hard to harder to really hard. Very often the hardest questions require us to do the least amount of calculations, which is great. That's one good trade-off. Okay. And so my next point is when you're dealing with story problems, what you want to do, preferably the first time you read something through, you want to use your notes extensively. Just constantly. You want to be doodling things down because that's a tool that they give you, and you want to take maximum advantage of it. Don't be a hero. Don't try to do things in your head if you don't have to. Because again, this test is going to try and wear you down. You're starting out with a certain amount of time and a certain amount of mental energy, and you're going to use that energy as you go along. And so I have no doubt on the early problems you can do Herculean feats of mathematics in your mind. The question is, as you get in the home stretch, the final 45 minutes of the test, can you maintain that same level of concentration? If not, you'll end up getting cheated out of your points, of getting questions wrong that you deserve to get right because, you were fading. That's exactly where your notes come in. Your notes are your lifeline that you can call on to help you. And so what you want to do is you want to translate words and numbers into variables and values. Most commonly, we're going to use X and Y. For my own personal preference, I like to use A, B, and C, but it seems like the test is geared towards using X, Y, and Z. And so that's what I'd recommend, just because when you read their answer explanations, which we talked about last week, that they don't always have your best interest at heart. They will give you explanations, yes, but they're not always the ones that I would recommend. Very often they seem to recommend really convoluted explanations. And by all means, if you can find an easier way of doing things or a more direct way of doing things, pick that. I do not recommend their solutions, but they will typically go with X, Y, and Z, and so that's what you should probably use. Try to put things in terms of variables that we can put into a formula. Okay, just a second.